that. So yeah, I'm excited to present the FOSC Modular Splice Closure, or MSC closure for short, which is on our newest splice closure offering. If you're familiar with the FOSC 450 splice closure, which is widely used, probably the most popular splice closure out there being used today, you'll see a lot of the same benefits and a lot of the same parts are being used with this closure. So it'll be very familiar with you and the technicians out in the field. But you'll also see some additional benefits in ways that this closure can be used and where it can be optimized in certain parts of the network. So we'll get started here with the presentation. There we go. So we'll cover a few things. We'll talk about what is the FOSC modular splice closure, why the FOSC modular splice closure is needed and why it was developed for the North American market, and then some of the key benefits of the closure. We'll also talk a little bit about the history of it, where it came from. Even though it is a new closure for our market, the closure itself has been used for a few years now in other markets and other aspects. So we'll talk a little bit about that. We'll talk about the design aspects of the FOSC MSC and what makes it a, what the parts that go into the closure and how it differs from the FOSC 450 and where you'll see those benefits. And we'll also talk about some of the collateral that's available, the spec sheets, ordering guides. We have video. I'll show a short video during this presentation, really just kind of shows how the closure goes together. And then we'll also talk about, where we see some of the applications where this could be used specifically, not just in, traditionally where you would use a splice closure, but some specific applications where we see that the MSC closure would be the ideal closure to use. So what is the FOSC MSC closure? It's not a FOSC 400 or 450 replacement. Those closures still exist and they're still sold and used today. It's really a complement to those closures. And where we specifically see that being a complement is in the rehab, rehabbing older closures that may be damaged or may need to be upgraded to a larger closure. This closure was designed specifically for microtube and microduct applications. So we'll talk a little bit about that. As well as, where we see this being used is with when you're using multiple drop cables and the capacity of this closure over the existing FOSC 450 C and D closure, you have a greater capacity for bringing more cables into the closure. So it would be ideal when you're bringing multiple or a larger amount of drop cables into a splice closure. So this does fill the gap between the FOSC 450 and the FOSC 600. If you're familiar with the FOSC 600, it's a larger closure than the 450. You have a larger splicer capacity, more cable capacity and so forth. So this is somewhere in between there, if you're familiar with those closures. And the closure has been released. We are taking orders for these. We have customers using these today out in the field. So it is available today. So the FOSC MSC uses a wide range of the existing FOSC components, and you'll see that as we go through the presentation. So the same splice trays, the same dome and clamp, and a lot of the same accessories that are used in the FOSC 450 line today are also used in the FOSC MSC closure. So if you have a customer that's using a FOSC 450D and they have splice trays in stock or some of the other components in stock, they will be compatible with this closure as well. and plus the technicians out in the field that have been using the FOSC 450 closure and are very familiar with it will be easily familiar with this closure as well. It does use some different cable attachments than what we use today, which we'll go over, and you'll see that. And it also uses gel segments instead of a single gel block with multiple cable ports. This closure uses individual gel segments that can be customized and ordered separately to build the closure that best fits your need for your specific application. And it does still have the one gel trigger or tail that is used to tighten up all of the gel blocks together. So little history of the closure. The closure was launched about almost 4 years ago now in the EMEA market or European market. The biggest difference between that closure and the closure that we're releasing in North America is the splice trays. If you see here on the photo, this uses fist style splice trays, which are commonly used and widely used in the European market. So there are a lot more trays in the closure, but it's less splicing per splice tray. So typically these splice trays will hold 12 single splices per tray, where you see the FOSC trays will hold up to 72, and in some applications 96 single splices per tray. So, but the rest of the closure, the gel segments, the cable attachments, the dome, the clamp, all the parts that you're familiar with in the FOSC 450 are the same parts that are used in both of these closures today. So the four major building blocks, or the four major components of this closure, are the gel segments, which is really the most important part of any splice closure, is how that closure gets sealed, and those cables get sealed as they enter the closure to prevent water or any other contaminants from getting inside that closure and affecting the network. So we still use the same gel that we use in our FOSC 450 that's been used for many years and is widely accepted, and it's really the number one way of sealing cables inside of a closure. So we use that same gel in this closure, just in a slightly different fashion, which we'll talk about. The cable attachments or adapters is when you bring the cable into the closure, how that gets secured inside the closure. And you'll see, we'll talk about how it's a little bit different than what we do in our FOSC 450 closure, but we do have some accessories and some kits that use some of the same components that we use today. So if a customer or technicians want to use like hose clamps and cable attachments, those are available for this closure as well. The fiber management, or the splice trays and slack baskets for storing your cable slack, are the exact same ones used in the FOSC 450 today. So you'll see the trays, the splice chips that go in the trays, the baskets and so forth. All of those are commonly used today in our products and carry over into this product line. The last part of the closure is the sealing of the dome and the dome to the base of the closure using the cable clamp and O-ring. Those are all the same parts that are used in the 450 C and D line today. So again, technicians that have been using the 450 will be very familiar with how this closure operates and how it goes together. And we'll just talk about some of the benefits from this and where you see where it's different. So the first segment we'll talk about, the first building block we'll talk about, is the gel segments. So the closure itself has 8 positions where we'll accept gel segments, and those gel segments come in different sizes, and we'll talk a little bit about that. And sizes are really based on the cable diameter. So you'll be able to see where you have larger diameter cables, how many cables would be able to be installed in the closure, or smaller diameter cables, you can fit multiple cables in a single gel segment, and you'll see where you have the greater capacity and a larger capacity for installing cables in the closure. So they are full wraparound gel seals, so they come in 2 segments that snap into each one of those segments in the closure. We have different sizes. We have multiple sizes that we'll talk about, and there's even a few that we're working on additionally to add to the product line that may not be mentioned in this presentation because they're not available yet, but they will be available. And when they are, they'll be added to the literature and the ordering guide and so forth. And then each one of the segments does come with the plugs or blind rods to plug up any unused ports. So you can see in this example, it's a four cable gel segment for 4 smaller diameter cables. If you were to only bring 2 or 3 or 1 cable in, you would just use the plugs to plug up any of the unused ports. You can see here's some of the segments that are available today and the cable diameters that work with those segments. So in the closure, I mentioned we have 8 segments. 7 segments are used for cables, and 1 segment would be used for grounding if you were to use armored cable and need a way to ground those cables. So with the other 7 segments, and you can see here, there's multiple ones available, and they range from 1 cable per segment all the way up to 8 cables per segment. And that really depends on the size of the cable that is being used and installed in the closure. So the closure would be built according to how many cables you're bringing in and what the diameter of those cables are. The size of those cables would dictate which gel segments that would be used with this closure. As I mentioned, we are working on a few additional ones. One of the ones that we are working on is a 6 cable segment that will work with 6 flat drop cables. We do have one today, the 4F, which will allow you to bring 4 flat drop cables in a segment, but we are developing one that will allow 6 flat drop cables, either from flat drop, single fiber flat drop, or flat drop from terminals, 4, 8, 12 fiber terminals. So when that's available, it will just allow you to have a greater capacity for running those smaller flat drop cables into the closure. This is where you can see the maximum amount of cables, depending on the cables that you're running in. This closure will accept anywhere from 7 to 56 cables in total. So you can see there's a wide range of cables that can be used, and this closure will work with all of those cables. So the way that the gel triggering system works is when those segments are installed in the closure, and there is another segment which we call a dummy segment. So if you didn't have any cables coming in, you could choose to put in a cable segment that has the dummy plugs or the blind rods in that segment if you knew you were going to be adding cable further down the road. Or you could choose to use a dummy segment, which is just a blank that would fill into one of those segments. And then it works just like the 450 today. There's a trigger that you turn clockwise, and that will compress the gel along the base of the closure, as well as along the cables, and provide that sealing for the closure itself. And there's also a positive when you de-trigger it or when you open up the closure, the segments separate and it separates that gel away from the base of the closure and the cables. So it's a really great design in that aspect. Next part we're going to talk about is the cable attachments, and you can see this is a little bit different than what people might be used to, but it is a great way for securing cables, and there's some additional benefits to using these. So these are what we call CTUs, or cable termination units, and they come in different sizes depending on the size of the cable that's being brought in. And the way these work is there's a metal band that secures around the cable and attaches to that cable termination unit, or CTU. And you can also secure down the strength member as well. So that has a securing mechanism on the CTU. One of the benefits of using these CTUs is these CTUs can be installed on the cables. The cables can be opened up, prepped out, get ready for installation in the closure. And the CTUs can be installed onto the cable and be ready to install in the closure before you even pull the closure out of the box. So it makes for a real easy installation and speeds up the installation of the cables into the closure. You can see we have these in multiple sizes, again, depending on the cable diameter. So they come from small, medium, large, and there's also a version that has a grounding option. So for armored cables, there's a version of the CTU that has that ground wire. So when you attach the cable, the armor is attached to the CTU, and then that ground wire can be brought to the grounding position for grounding those cables to the external of the closure. So another great feature of the way these CTUs and the gel segment works is if you're adding cables to a closure that's already built, you can go ahead and add these cables in and only open up the one segment, the gel segment where you're working on, you're adding a cable, and you're not affecting any of the other cables that have already been installed in service in the closure. We also have accessories for known installation practices or standard practices that are used today. So there are cable attachment accessories that can be ordered to allow you to use hose clamps and securing the strength members to that attachment, or even for some of the smaller cables, we have cable attachment hardware for securing those cables directly with tie wraps, which may be common practice today. So we have a few different ways of securing and attaching cables inside of the closure. So the next part that we're going to talk about is the fiber management, which is the splice trays and the baskets. And again, I've mentioned it uses the same splice trays, the same basket, the same tower assembly that is used in the FOSC 450 and even the FOSC 400 today. So it has the hinging splice trays, different storage baskets. So for you can get the standard storage basket or a large storage basket if you're storing a large amount of buffer tubes inside the closure. So all of the products that are used in the 450 today are used in the MSC closure you see here. Here's just some information about that. Again, all those trays are compatible for single fiber and a ribbon fiber splicing. So we do have the ribbon trays that are higher or deeper than the single fiber trays. And you can see the capacity for the closure would be 432 single fiber splices or 1,728 fibers doing ribbon or mass fusion splicing. The last part of the closure we'll talk about is the dome and the base. So one of the differences with the MSC closure compared to the closures today is the base of the closure. So today's closures, you have to slide the base onto your cables first. Slide that base down your cables, prep all your cables, install them in the closure, and then you bring that base back up to the closure when you're securing the base to the internal part of the splice case, as well as installing the dome with the clamp and the O-ring. With the MSC closure, that base actually goes on last. So it'll slide over the splice trays and over the prep. If you've already done your cable prep, your splicing, that base will slide over all of that and then lock in place with a single locking pin. And then the dome can then be installed and secured with the cable clamp and O-ring for sealing. So we have two different sizes of the closure. They're the FOSC MSC C and E closure. The C closure is very similar in size to the FOSC 450 C closure today. And then the E closure is similar in size to the FOSC 450 D closure today. So the reason why we call it the E and not the D is there's actually a size in between. For the fist style splice trays, that's the D closure. So that's where we refer to it as the E closure today. But it uses the same splice trays, same basket, same dome as the FOSC 450 D closure today. So you can see the size of the closure here, which is either the same or very close to the 450 C and D closures today. So here's where we talked about the base of the closure and how that slides over the trays and over the gel segments and locks in place. It's a real easy installation for that part of the closure. For anybody that's done splicing, I'll say everybody forgets to install that base on the cables once, and then you'll never forget to do that again. With this closure, you don't have to worry about it because that base gets installed at the end of the operation, not at the beginning. I mentioned that the cable is optimized for microtubes or microducts, and the way this happens is we have this external bracket that can be installed on the closure. This can be either used with microducts, or if you're just using standard cables, they can also be attached to that bracket using tie wraps or hose clamps as a way to manage the cables on the outside of the closure. It's not necessary. The cables are secured inside the closure, but it's just an additional way of securing cables. But for microtube or microduct applications, it has hardware that will install onto that bracket, and then the microducts can be directly attached to that bracket. And then the microducts themselves, they can be installed either directly into the closure, or they can be installed where they end just outside of the closure. So it can be installed both ways. If the microducts are installed in the closure, they do need to be sealed and sealed properly. So if a microduct were to get damaged and water to get in there, that end of that microduct needs to be sealed so the water doesn't enter the closure. What we see as a more popular way of installing microducts is to leave those outside of the closure, just shy of the gel block. They'll still, the cable that's exiting the microduct is still protected under the base of the closure, but it relieves the chance of the technician not sealing that microduct correctly and potentially getting water inside of that closure. But so it could be done one of two ways for that installation. We also have different accessories that come along with the that can be ordered to come along with the closure. We have wall and pole mounting brackets. Customers are installing these on a vault below ground and maybe want to attach it to the wall, or if they're installing it on a pole or on a wall, an above ground application, those brackets can be ordered to go along with the closure. We also have strand mount brackets. Most of these are installed in an aerial type application. They use the same strand mount brackets that the FOSC 450 line uses today. So, that same hardware can be ordered for these closures as well. That external bracket that I mentioned for securing cables on the outside of the closure, or for the application of using microtubes or microducts, can be ordered to go with the closure, as well as we have a full line of work stands that can be used for the closure that we use with our closures today, and they can also be used with these closures as well. So we have quite a bit of information and literature and collateral available for this closure. We have presentations, data sheets, spec sheets, ordering guides, installation instructions for all of these products. All of that information is available from CommScope at our website, or from your CommScope representative. We also have this animation that I'm going to pull up, and hopefully it shows. So it's a quick, I think it's only about a 2 or 3 minute video. There might be some sound associated with it, but it's really just some background music. But I might talk a little bit during the presentation, the video, and you'll see how easy this closure can go together. Okay. Hopefully that video came across and you kind of saw an animation of how it goes together, the real simple way this closure goes together and how it gets installed and used out in the field. So, got a couple more slides to go over here. So again, we'll review the closure, talk about the key benefits and features of the closure. So you got the expanded capacity using those wraparound gel seals and how many cables can be brought in. We'll accept cables up to 1.06 inches in diameter. So that covers a vast majority or a lot of the cables that, any cables that would be used that would used in a closure of this size, or a splice closure with the splice capacity of this size would be able to be used in the closure. And it will again do 432 single fiber splices or 1728 ribbon splices. It's compatible again with the existing FOSC C and D trays, baskets, and so forth. It uses that gel seal, so the gel sealing and the cable attachment are the two of the key components for a splice closure. We'll talk a little bit about the gel sealing and some of the specific applications we see where this closure could be used. Again, uses a lot of the existing accessories from some of our other product lines, like the FOSC 400 and FOSC 450. It is IP68 tested, so it'll work in below ground, ground level, aerial uses. It works in all different types of environments and locations, just like where we see the 450 closure and being used today. Available in the two sizes, which we'll talk a little bit about on the next slide as well. And it's pretty simple design. We call it kind of a toolless closure. There's really no special tools needed, just the tools that a technician would typically have on hand for building a splice closure. No other special tools or anything needed. And you are easily able to use this for a repair type application or an upgrade type application, which we'll talk about. So here's a kind of a quick chart of the two different sizes, the C and the E size, and the capacity that those closures have with using the different trays and the different splice modules. So you can see that here with it, where we had said the capacity for the largest closure will do 432 single fiber splicing or 1728 ribbon splicing. So, talk about a couple of specific applications where we see this closure could be used for. One is the microduct or micro cable application. You can see there's a few photos here showing that. We don't see a lot of that here in North America yet. There are some places that are doing it, but we definitely see it. The use of microducts and micro cable increasing. Smaller ducts or smaller trenches needed for running ducts, blowing cables through there. Some of the installation of these makes it easier in certain applications than a traditional burying cable below ground application using micro trenching and so forth. So this is where we see that closure being ideally used. And you can see here one of the photo that talked about in the bottom right-hand corner where the microducts can either be brought to just outside the closure or they could be brought into the closure, depending on your specific application. Another application where we see this closure being used is where you have multiple cables or a greater quantity of cables being brought into a single closure, whether that's kind of standard cables or drop cables, or using this for running customer flat drop cables back to a splice closure. We see this being ideally used. You can see the picture over here on the right-hand side of a vault with, this has five splice closures in that vault today. Some of that is depending on the amount of splicing being done, but they're just also the amount of cables that they're bringing into those closures. Some of these closures are actually daisy chained together to allow for that additional splice capacity and cable capacity, where some of that could be done with fewer MSC closures depending on the application. So the last slide we have here is the last application we really see the MSC closure being an ideal closure is for rehab or upgrade. We know a lot of closures out there in the market today. They may not seal as well as we see with our gel sealing closures. That can lead to water getting into the closure, and in cold environments that could lead to freezing and forming ice inside the closure. So with the way that the MSC operates and with the way that the dome slides over the cables and the splicing inside the closure, we could see the MSC closure being used to rehab some of these existing closures that are out in the field today that maybe don't seal anymore or are damaged. And the MSC would be ideal for rehabbing and rebuilding those closures. So that's the end of the slide presentation. I don't know if we want to open it up to questions. I think everybody may be on mute. I see one in the chat. Okay, so what is the availability lead time compared with the closure? I don't have that information. That would be available through the sales through your sales rep or somebody in sales that could answer that question on the availability of the closure.
All right. Looks like there might not be any questions unless anyone has something last minute that they want to unmute or throw in chat. Okay.
I would add
Well, I was
going to say, I would add if you do have any questions on this closure, or maybe for a specific application, reach out to your CommScope representative, reach out to your CommScope FAE or field application engineer. We're all well versed in these closures and their use, and to help you with your specific application for building your closure, what would be the best closure and the best the way to build that closure for your application, whether it's what gel segments would work best for your specific application, the splice trays and so forth.
All right. Awesome. If there are no more questions, you guys can go ahead and leave. And again, thank you to Tom for putting this together and allowing us to learn a little bit more about one of CommScope's newest products.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you again, Tom. Have a good day, everyone.